Imagine a world vastly different from our own, a world shaped by the fall of a great empire and the slow, often turbulent, emergence of new kingdoms. This is Europe in the Middle Ages, a period spanning roughly 1,000 years, from the 5th to the 15th century. It's a time often romanticized in tales of knights and castles, but the reality was a complex tapestry woven from the lives of people across a vast social spectrum, from the lowliest peasant to the most powerful king. The story begins with the decline and eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire. This monumental event left a power vacuum across the continent, leading to centuries of upheaval, migration, and the rise of Germanic kingdoms. Think of it as a great tree falling in a forest, creating space for new saplings to grow, each vying for sunlight and dominance. The familiar structures of Roman law, administration, and infrastructure gradually fragmented, giving way to localized power structures and a more agrarian-based society. In this evolving landscape, the Christian Church emerged as a unifying force, providing spiritual guidance, education, albeit limited, and a sense of shared identity across fragmented territories. Monasteries became centers of learning, preserving ancient texts and developing new agricultural techniques. The Church's influence permeated every aspect of medieval life, from birth to death, shaping beliefs, morals, and social customs. The early centuries of the Middle Ages, often dubbed the Dark Ages, a term increasingly debated by historians, were characterized by instability and the constant threat of invasion. Viking raids from the north, Magyar incursions from the east, and continued pressure from various groups led to the development of localized defense systems and the rise of a warrior class. This period of flux laid the groundwork for the feudal system, a hierarchical social and political structure that would come to define much of the medieval era. Feudalism was essentially a system of land ownership and personal loyalty. Kings, theoretically owning all the land, granted large estates or fiefs to powerful nobles or lords in exchange for military service and loyalty. These lords, in turn, subdivided their land among lesser nobles or vassals who pledged their service and allegiance. At the bottom of this pyramid were the vast majority of the population, the peasants or serfs, who were tied to the land and owed labor and a portion of their produce to their local lord. Imagine this social structure as a pyramid, with the king at the apex, a small layer of powerful nobles beneath him, followed by layers of lesser lords and knights, and finally, the broad base of the peasantry supporting the entire structure. This system provided a degree of order and stability in a decentralized world, but it also created a rigid social hierarchy, with limited opportunities for upward mobility. Life for a peasant was vastly different from that of a noble, and the distinctions were deeply ingrained in the social fabric of medieval Europe. Our journey through medieval Europe will explore these different levels of society, examining the daily lives, the challenges, and the opportunities, or lack thereof, for people in each social stratum. We will delve into the world of the peasants, the backbone of the medieval economy, and ascend through the ranks of knights, nobles, and ultimately, the kings who ruled over this complex and fascinating era. For the vast majority of people living in medieval Europe, life revolved around the land. Peasants, or serfs as many were bound to the land they worked, formed the foundation of the medieval economy. Their lives were characterized by hard labor, a close connection to the rhythms of the seasons, and a limited scope of experience beyond their local village. Imagine waking before dawn, the air often damp and cold, to begin a day of arduous physical labor. The primary task was agriculture, plowing fields with simple tools, sowing seeds by hand, tending to crops like wheat, barley, and rye, and harvesting with sickles and scythes. The work was back-breaking, and often relentless, dictated by the cycles of planting, growing, and harvesting. The success of the harvest directly determined their survival through the long winter months. Peasant families typically lived in small, simple dwellings, made of wattle and daub, interwoven sticks plastered with mud. These homes often consisted of a single room, shared with livestock, providing little privacy, and offering limited protection from the elements. Furniture was sparse, often consisting of rough-hewn benches, stools, and straw-filled sacks for beds. Their diet was basic, and often monotonous, consisting primarily of coarse bread, porridge or gruel, made from grains, and whatever vegetables they could grow in small garden plots. Meat was a rare luxury, usually only consumed on special occasions, or after a successful hunt, though hunting on the lord's land was often forbidden. Ale or cider were common drinks, as water sources were often contaminated. The medieval peasant's life was deeply intertwined with the local village community. They worked the land communally in open field systems, where strips of land were allocated to different families. Village life was governed by tradition and custom, with communal decisions often made in village assemblies. Religious festivals and local celebrations provided rare moments of respite and social interaction. The relationship between peasants and their lord was a defining aspect of their existence. In exchange for the right to work the land and protection, peasants owed their lord various obligations. This often included labor service, working the lord's demesne, the land directly controlled by the lord for a certain number of days each week. They also had to pay dues and taxes in the form of a portion of their harvest, livestock, or other goods. These obligations could be burdensome and leave little surplus for the peasant family. While life was hard, it wasn't without its own forms of resilience and community. Peasants developed strong bonds with their neighbors, relying on each other for support during planting, harvesting, and times of hardship. They possessed a deep knowledge of the land and agricultural practices, passed down through generations. Their lives, though seemingly simple, were the foundation upon which the entire medieval social structure rested. They were the unsung workforce that sustained the nobles, the clergy, and ultimately, the kings of medieval Europe. Ascending the social ladder from the peasantry, we encounter the world of knights and warfare, a defining aspect of the medieval era. Knights were essentially mounted warriors, who formed the military backbone of feudal society. Their lives were often characterized by a rigorous upbringing, a code of conduct known as chivalry, and the constant potential for conflict. The journey to knighthood typically began in childhood. Young boys from noble families would first serve as pages in a lord's household, learning basic etiquette and horsemanship. Around the age of 14, they would become squires, serving a knight directly, attending to his armor, weapons, and horses, and accompanying him into battle. This apprenticeship provided practical experience in warfare and the knightly arts. The ceremony of knighthood was a significant rite of passage, often involving religious elements and a public oath of loyalty and service. Upon becoming a knight, the individual was expected to uphold the code of chivalry, a set of ideals that emphasized honor, courage, loyalty to one's lord, respect for women, and protection of the weak and the church. While often idealized in literature, the extent to which knights consistently adhered to these principles in practice varied greatly. Warfare was a frequent occurrence in medieval Europe, driven by territorial disputes, dynastic ambitions, and the pursuit of wealth and power. Knights were the elite fighting force in these conflicts, their effectiveness on the battlefield stemming from their mastery of horsemanship and their possession of expensive armor and weapons. Imagine a medieval battlefield, with heavily armored knights on horseback charging with lances, a formidable and terrifying sight. Armor evolved over the medieval period, starting with chainmail and gradually incorporating plate armor, which offered greater protection, but was also heavy and cumbersome. Weapons included swords, lances, axes, maces, and later, the early forms of firearms. Siege warfare, involving the attack and defense of castles, was also a common aspect of medieval conflict, requiring specialized knowledge and equipment. Castles were not just military fortifications, they were also centers of lordly power and administration. Knights often resided in, or were closely associated with castles, serving as their lord's garrison and administrators of the surrounding lands. Life within a castle could range from periods of relative comfort to prolonged sieges and the constant threat of attack. Beyond large-scale battles, knights also engaged in smaller skirmishes, raids, and tournaments. Tournaments were originally mock battles, designed to provide knights with training and an opportunity to display their martial prowess. Over time, they evolved into elaborate social events, attracting nobles from far and wide, and often involving jousting and other individual combat. These events reinforced the social hierarchy and the prestige associated with knighthood. The life of a knight was thus a complex mix of military service, adherence to a code of honor, at least in theory, and involvement in the social and political structures of feudal society. They were a privileged class, their status derived from their ability to wage war, and their loyalty to their lords, playing a crucial role in shaping the political landscape of medieval Europe. Above the ranks of knights in the feudal hierarchy stood the nobility, the lords and ladies, who held vast tracts of land and wielded considerable political, economic, and social power. They were the direct vassals of the king, or other high-ranking nobles, and their influence shaped the lives of everyone within their domains. Imagine a landscape dotted with castles and manors, each serving as the center of a noble's power. These were not just residences, but also administrative hubs, where lords oversaw their estates, collected taxes and dues from the peasants, administered justice in local courts, and maintained their own small armies of knights and men-at-arms. The level of autonomy enjoyed by nobles varied depending on their relationship with their overlord, but many exercised significant control within their territories. Land was the primary source of wealth and power in medieval Europe, and the nobility controlled the vast majority of it. They derived income from the agricultural produce of their lands, the labor services of their peasants, and various fees and taxes levied on those living within their jurisdiction. This economic power translated directly into political influence. Nobles could raise armies, build fortifications, and challenge the authority of even the king, if they possessed sufficient resources and support. The relationship between a lord and his vassals, often knights, was based on mutual obligations. The lord granted land fiefs and protection, while the vassals pledged loyalty and military service. This system of personal bonds and reciprocal duties formed the backbone of feudal society. However, these relationships could also be complex and sometimes fraught with tension, as ambitious nobles sought to increase their own power and independence. Noble life was not solely focused on warfare and administration. It also involved a distinct culture and set of social customs. Chivalry, while ideally a code for knights, also influenced noble behavior, emphasizing honor, lineage, and courtly manners. Elaborate rituals and ceremonies marked important life events, such as births, marriages, and deaths within noble families, reinforcing their social status and alliances. Women of noble birth also played significant roles, although often within the constraints of a patriarchal society. They could inherit and manage land, especially if there were no male heirs. As wives and mothers, they were responsible for the running of the household, the education of their children, and the maintenance of social connections through hospitality and patronage. Powerful noble women could also exert considerable political influence through their husbands or sons, acting as advisors and intermediaries. Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was queen consort of both France and England, and a powerful figure in her own right, serves as a prominent example of a noble woman who significantly impacted the political landscape of her time. The nobility formed the ruling class of medieval Europe. Their power derived from their control of land and their position within the feudal hierarchy. Their actions and decisions shaped the political map, influenced economic development, and defined the social order of the era. Despite these complexities, the Christian Church was undeniably the most powerful and unifying institution in medieval Europe. Its influence permeated every level of society, shaping beliefs, guiding actions, and leaving an enduring legacy on the culture and civilization of the continent. While medieval Europe was predominantly an agrarian society, the later centuries of the period witnessed a significant resurgence of urban life and the growth of trade. This development began to gradually shift the social and economic landscape, offering new opportunities and challenging the traditional feudal order. Imagine small villages growing into bustling market towns, attracting merchants, artisans, and people seeking new livelihoods beyond the confines of rural agricultural life. Several factors contributed to this urban revival. Increased agricultural productivity, partly due to new farming techniques, led to a surplus of food, which could support larger non-agricultural populations. Relative periods of peace and stability in some regions encouraged trade and travel. Strategic locations, such as river crossings, natural harbors, and the intersections of trade routes, became centers of commercial activity. Towns often grew around existing fortifications, burghs, monasteries, or royal residences, offering protection and attracting settlers. As these towns grew, they developed their own distinct character and social structures, often differing from the hierarchical feudal system of the countryside. Trade networks expanded across Europe, connecting regions and facilitating the exchange of goods. Luxury items like spices, silk, and precious metals from the East flowed along established routes. Within Europe, there was trade in timber, wool, wine, salt, iron, and other essential commodities. Markets became central to urban life, providing a place for local artisans and merchants to sell their wares, and for people to acquire goods from distant lands. The growth of trade fostered the development of a merchant class, individuals whose wealth and influence were based on commerce rather than land ownership. These merchants often formed guilds, associations that regulated trade, set standards for craftsmanship, and provided mutual support for their members. Guilds played a significant role in the economic and social life of medieval towns, often wielding considerable political power within the urban centers. Towns gradually gained a degree of autonomy from the feudal lords who controlled the surrounding countryside. Through charters, often obtained in exchange for payments or services, towns could secure rights to self-governance, including the ability to elect their own officials, levy taxes, and administer justice within their walls. This growth of urban self-rule marked a departure from the strict hierarchy of feudalism, and provided a space for new forms of social and political organization. The rise of towns and trade also led to the development of a more monetized economy. While barter remained common in rural areas, the increasing volume of commercial transactions spurred the use of coinage and the emergence of early forms of banking and credit. This shift towards a money-based economy had significant implications for social relations and economic opportunities. The growth of towns and trade was not without its challenges. Overcrowding, sanitation issues, and the risk of fire and disease were constant concerns in medieval urban centers. Tensions could also arise between the established feudal order and the burgeoning urban populations with their newfound wealth and autonomy. Despite these challenges, the growth of towns and trade was a transformative force in medieval Europe. It spurred economic innovation, created new social classes, fostered a spirit of enterprise, and laid the groundwork for the more dynamic and interconnected world of the later Middle Ages and the Renaissance. The bustling streets of medieval towns represented a significant shift from the agrarian focus of the earlier centuries, signaling a period of increasing social and economic complexity. The medieval period, while sometimes mischaracterized as a dark age, possessed its own vibrant and evolving culture and traditions of learning. While the direct inheritance of classical knowledge was somewhat diminished in the early centuries, new forms of intellectual and artistic expression emerged, often deeply intertwined with the Christian faith. Imagine the hushed scriptoriums of monasteries, where monks painstakingly copied and illuminated manuscripts, preserving not only religious texts but also fragments of classical literature and scientific knowledge. These illuminated manuscripts, with their intricate artwork and decorative lettering, were not just books but works of art, representing a dedication to both learning and spiritual devotion. Monasteries served as crucial centers of intellectual life, providing the primary form of education available during the early Middle Ages. Cathedral schools, attached to major churches, also played an increasingly important role in education, particularly in the later medieval period. These schools often attracted students who would go on to serve in the church or in royal administrations, contributing to a gradual increase in literacy and intellectual pursuits beyond the monastic walls. The 12th century witnessed a significant intellectual revival, sometimes referred to as the Renaissance of the 12th century. Increased contact with the Byzantine world and the Islamic world, through trade and the Crusades, led to the rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman texts, particularly in the fields of philosophy, science and mathematics. Scholars like Peter Abelard and Thomas Aquinas engaged with these rediscovered works, attempting to reconcile classical reason with Christian theology, leading to the development of scholasticism, a dominant intellectual movement of the High Middle Ages. The rise of universities in the 12th and 13th centuries marked a pivotal moment in the history of learning in Europe. Centers of higher education like Bologna, Paris, Oxford and Cambridge emerged as autonomous institutions, attracting students from across the continent. Universities fostered intellectual debate, promoted the study of law, medicine and theology, and played a crucial role in shaping the intellectual landscape of the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Medieval art and architecture were overwhelmingly influenced by religious themes. The Romanesque style, with its rounded arches and massive walls, gave way to the Gothic style, characterized by soaring heights, pointed arches, stained glass windows, and intricate sculptures. Grand cathedrals, such as Notre Dame in Paris and Cologne Cathedral, were not just places of worship but also expressions of civic pride, artistic innovation, and the deep religious faith of the era. Literature in the Middle Ages encompassed a wide range of forms, from religious texts and saints' lives, to epic poems like Beowulf and the Song of Roland, which celebrated heroic deeds and chivalric ideals. Vernacular languages began to gain prominence in literature, alongside Latin, making stories and knowledge more accessible to a wider audience. The development of troubadour poetry in southern France, with its themes of courtly love, also represented a significant cultural innovation. Music in the medieval period was largely liturgical, with Gregorian chant forming the basis of church music. However, secular music also existed, performed by wandering minstrels, and associated with courtly entertainment. The development of polyphony, music with multiple melodic lines, marked an important evolution in Western musical tradition. In essence, medieval culture and learning were complex and dynamic, evolving over the 1,000-year period. While deeply rooted in Christianity, they also incorporated elements of classical tradition, and fostered new forms of intellectual inquiry and artistic expression. The foundations laid during the Middle Ages in education, art, literature and music would have a lasting impact on the development of Western civilization. The later centuries of the Middle Ages, roughly from the 14th to the 15th century, were a time of significant upheaval and transformation, marked by a series of challenges that tested the resilience of medieval society, and ultimately paved the way for the Renaissance and the early modern period. Imagine a Europe grappling with devastating crises. The Black Death, a bubonic plague pandemic that swept across the continent in the mid-14th century, caused a catastrophic loss of life, estimated at perhaps a third to half of the European population. This demographic disaster had profound social, economic and political consequences, leading to labor shortages, economic disruption, and widespread fear and uncertainty. The established social order was shaken, and the authority of institutions like the Church was questioned in the face of such immense suffering. The late Middle Ages also witnessed significant warfare and political instability. The 100 Years' War between England and France, a protracted conflict over territorial claims and dynastic succession, had a devastating impact on both countries, disrupting trade, causing widespread destruction, and contributing to social unrest. Other regional conflicts and power struggles further destabilized the European landscape. The authority of the Church also faced increasing challenges during this period. The Avignon Papacy, where the popes resided in Avignon rather than Rome, and the subsequent Western Schism, with multiple claimants to the papacy, undermined the Church's spiritual authority, and led to confusion and division within Christendom. Calls for reform grew louder, setting the stage for the religious upheavals of the Reformation in the following century. Economic changes also marked the late Middle Ages. While trade continued to grow, the disruptions caused by plague and war led to fluctuations and challenges. The rise of powerful merchant families and banking institutions, particularly in Italian city-states, further shifted economic power away from the traditional land-based wealth of the nobility. Social tensions also increased. Peasant revolts, such as the Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381, erupted in response to economic hardship, oppressive taxation, and the desire for greater social mobility. These uprisings, though often brutally suppressed, demonstrated the growing discontent among the lower classes, and the strains on the feudal system. Despite these challenges, the late Middle Ages also witnessed significant cultural and intellectual developments that laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. The continued rediscovery of classical texts, particularly in Italy, fueled a renewed interest in humanism, a focus on human potential and achievement. Artists like Giotto began to move away from purely religious themes towards more naturalistic representations of the human form. The development of new technologies, such as the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, would revolutionize the spread of knowledge and ideas, breaking the Church's monopoly on information and contributing to the intellectual ferment of the coming centuries. In essence, the late Middle Ages was a period of crisis and transformation. While facing immense challenges like plague, war, and religious upheaval, it also witnessed the seeds of the Renaissance being sown, with new intellectual, artistic, and technological developments that would ultimately lead to the end of the medieval era, and the dawn of a new age in European history. Despite the vast changes that followed, the Middle Ages left an enduring legacy that continues to shape the world we live in today. From the political structures of modern nations to our art, architecture, language, and legal systems, the echoes of medieval Europe are still discernible. Consider the political landscape of Europe. The kingdoms that emerged during the Middle Ages, often through complex processes of consolidation and conflict, form the basis of many of the modern nation-states we know today. The concepts of monarchy, parliament, and centralized administration, though evolving significantly, have their roots in medieval governance. The development of common law in England, for example, is a direct inheritance from the medieval period. The social structures of the Middle Ages, though vastly different from our own, also left their mark. The hierarchical ideas inherent in feudalism influenced later social divisions, and the long struggle for greater social mobility has its origins in the rigid social order of the medieval era. The growth of towns, and the emergence of a merchant class, laid the foundation for the capitalist economies that would later develop. The profound influence of the Christian Church during the Middle Ages shaped the religious landscape of Europe and beyond. The divisions within Christianity that emerged in the late medieval period, and the Reformation, continue to have a significant impact on religious affiliations and beliefs worldwide. The artistic and architectural achievements, inspired by religious faith during the Middle Ages, remain iconic and continue to inspire awe. The intellectual developments of the medieval period, from the preservation of classical knowledge in monasteries, to the rise of universities and scholasticism, were crucial for the transmission of learning and the development of Western intellectual tradition. The emphasis on reason and logic within scholastic thought laid some of the groundwork for the scientific revolution of the early modern period. The art and literature of the Middle Ages continue to captivate and inform our understanding of the period. Gothic cathedrals stand as magnificent testaments to the architectural and engineering skills of medieval builders. Epic poems and vernacular literature provide insights into the values, beliefs, and stories that shaped medieval culture. Even our language bears the imprint of the Middle Ages. The influx of Germanic and Romance languages following the fall of Rome, and their subsequent evolution, formed the basis of many modern European languages. Words and phrases we use daily have their origins in medieval terms and concepts. In conclusion, while the Middle Ages may seem distant and sometimes shrouded in romanticism or mischaracterization, it was a pivotal period in European and world history. It was a time of significant challenges and transformations that laid the foundations for many of the political, social, religious, intellectual, and cultural structures that define the modern world. By understanding life in medieval Europe, from the daily struggles of peasants to the complex power dynamics of kings, we gain a deeper appreciation for the long and intricate journey of human civilization and the enduring legacy of this fascinating era.